That's me. You guys are going to regret clapping, that's for sure. Okay, yes, hello, my name is Nels Anderson. I was the lead designer on Mark the Ninja. And this is basically half my GDC talk, because Brian asked me to only talk for half an hour, which I will do my best to do. This may go short, this may go really long. So if there's time at the end, we will do like a Q&A thing. Apparently, well, I'll talk about how to do that when we get there, if we do. Okay, so, yes, designing Mark the Ninja. So, a little bit about me before we get going. I was actually born and raised here. I went to here for undergrad, and I came up here for graduate school, which is why I'm in Canada in general. And then about a year ago, I finished the Canadian rites of induction and swore my fealty to the Queen, and became a full-on Canadian citizen, which is actually super awesome. I used to work at this place with hopefully maybe a few people who also used to do that here. I worked the guy who made this game on this game, which was pretty fun. And then I came here and worked on this game. So I think probably most people are at least vaguely aware of the game. But if you're not, it was released on September 7th on Xbox Live Arcade. And people really liked it, which was surprising for us, but cool. For a brief period of time, it was actually the highest rated PC game ever. Which was more of a quirk of statistics than anything, and we all know Metacritic is kind of bullshit anyway. But seeing our game on that list above Out of the Park Baseball 2007 was really, really quite rewarding. So actually, like, a buddy of mine is really into baseball, and he says it is actually a phenomenal baseball game, and I don't doubt that it is. I'm sure it's actually really good. Anyway, it ended up being just the highest rated PC game of last year, tying with Dishonored, which is kind of coincidental and hilarious because that's also a stealth game that kind of is built on similar principles and is also really freaking good. So I don't say this to toot our own horn or anything like that, but rather we took a lot of risks designing Mark of the Ninja, and we did a lot of things that people hadn't really done in the past, and we were actually rewarded for it. Like, people really connected with that innovation, and that's kind of what I'm going to talk about today. How on the surface, Ninja doesn't really resemble a stealth game, but kind of deep down it really does. So Mark of the Ninja fits firmly, and when we kind of came up with the initial idea, I absolutely wanted it to live to be a straight-up, dyed-in-the-wool stealth game, that it sort of felt like these types of canonical stealth games that I grew up really, really loving and really influenced me as a designer. We want to make sure that the game felt like one of those. I actually meant to cut that slide. That was from the GDC talk. Ignore that. But if you are interested in genres more broadly, and you have access to the GDC Vault or whatever, I talk about that a lot more there. This is the trimmed-down, skinny version. Anyway, yes, Mark of the Ninja is unabashedly a stealth game. So when my introduction to kind of stealth games as a unique style was Looking Glass's Thief. It was kind of released in It was released in 1998, kind of the year that stealth kind of became its own style. Metal Gear Solid, Tenchu, and Thief all came out in that same year. And Thief was really interesting to me because it was basically the first game I'd ever played where the world felt like it existed separate from the player character. Like, you know, most games, there's kind of like this bubble of agency around your avatar, and then wherever you're not, it's functionally like the world is just this static, dead thing, right? But Thief was really interesting, and I think this was kind of more function following from form, but in a stealth game, like what's the fundamental like fictional conceit? It's that you're sneaky, and generally the world isn't going to know where you are. So kind of by definition, the world then has to exist separately from you, and that's part of the reason why Thief was so bloody interesting, is because it had to build out this robust world that existed separate from you, and to do that it had to have all these systems and rules that kind of dictated how that world worked. And then the game became about understanding how those systems works and then manipulating them to get what you want. And that's actually deep down what stealth games are about. So there's this notion I have in my head. I haven't really come up with great terminology for it, but we'll just call it gameplay flow for now. And basically it's kind of like, it's not like an either-or thing. There's like a spectrum here, right? So far on one end, you have these very designer-directed, that's what I'm going to call them for now, experiences where like the flow of the game is all defined by like very specific content that designers have built, right? So, you know, you walk into some area, some enemies get spawned, they charge at you and you have to react and survive. Or if it's like some kind of puzzle, you know, you have to create the solution of the puzzle exactly, again, how the designer dictated it. Or if it's like dexterity, platforming, jumping thing, whatever. Regardless, the flow of the experience, the way the player is thinking about it is they have to succeed on terms that the game itself has defined. And kind of on the other end of the spectrum is what I call player-directed gameplay flow, where, you know, obviously at like a very high level, you still have goals. It's not completely goalless, but aside from like very high-level goals, the games end up being about providing the players with just a bunch of different tools, abilities, systems, understanding of those systems, and then just kind of saying, approach it however you see fit. And, you know, this is very much not a value judgment, right? Like, we can build fantastic, and plenty of people have built fantastic experiences that kind of live, you know, on that, like, more cinematic, scripted, whatever side. But I think that perhaps the territory on the kind of the more player-directed side is not nearly as well explored, and there's a lot of interesting ideas there that we haven't really dug deep into yet. And that is what we absolutely wanted to do with Mark of the Ninja, to make it a very, very player-directed game. Because what the interesting thing about this style of gameplay is that it ends up being all about intentionality, right? Like, unlike most other, you know, avatar character-based games, stealth games tend to be kind of more like strategy games, where you're always thinking about cause and effect, right? And it's all about playing intentionally, where, you know, you have some objective Z that you want to meet. So, you know, okay, well, I need to do X over here and then Y over here, and then those things put together will produce this outcome. Again, in contrast to the more designer-directed thing, where it's all about reaction and survival. So really, intentionality is what stealth games are about, and intentional play and player-centric systems. Like, this is the core, this is the beating heart of this style. And obviously, when I'm talking about this stuff, this is all stuff that we figured out, like, in retrospect. This isn't like we had these grand high notions at the beginning. We're like, oh, we just need to do this. But kind of as we were sort of backfilling, you know, kind of why the decisions we made in Ninja worked as we were making them, that this is kind of where it ended up living, right? That, like, intentional play and player-centric systems, this is the stuff that stealth games are about. And so, if we wanted Ninja to feel like a stealth game, it needed to be about these things. But that's kind of all it actually needed to be about. Because, as we were starting to develop the game, what we discovered is that, like, a lot of the decisions we were making that made Ninja feel more like a stealth game were actually basically in stark contrast, almost the exact opposite in a lot of cases, to what other stealth games had done in the past. And that's kind of what I'm going to be talking about. So I call this the 5 heresies of Ninja, because that sounds dramatic. But heresy is all about violating tradition anyway. It kind of makes sense. But yeah, at a very high level, like, there's a lot of smaller micro things, but kind of there are 5 big things that we did with Ninja that are really in contrast to what games in the past, stealth games in the past have done. But at the core, it was still all about providing that core stealth experience about intentional play and player-centric systems. Okay, the first, transparent stealth systems. So, you know, one of the fundamental things you need to be able to understand in a stealth game is, am I concealed or not, right? And usually that manifests in 2 different senses, I guess. There's the whole light, darkness, am I concealed, hidden thing, and then there's the am I making noise thing. So in Mark of the Ninja, with light and darkness, it's completely binary. Like, either you are perfectly concealed or perfectly hidden, and that's it. As compared to most stealth games in the past, where you have, you know, some kind of like analog light meter or a light gem or some other more analog notion. And because Mark the Ninja is a 2D side-scrolling stealth game, we were able, rather than having some kind of like exogenous HUD element or whatever, we just actually put the majority of the changes on the character themselves. Like, the character basically became the light gem. So you can see here when does that show up okay? Yeah, that's all right. Like, you know, Mr. Ninja Man's kind of hanging underneath this light. You can see, like, the blue in his pants, and you can see the skin tones. But when he's in darkness, he's completely black. He has these white outlines, and you can see the red highlights, and that's it. And so we wanted that, like, the difference between those 2 states to be very, 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 very clear and obvious. There is one caveat, and so the reason why stealth games in the past had kind of this analog notion of light is so that you can provide like a gradient of failure, right? Because if your game exists where either I'm concealed or I'm hidden, that's not really very interesting. Like some of the most interesting stuff in stealth games is like when someone kind of like catches a glimpse of you, and then you have to go do like an oh shit and recover thing. That's actually something we built into Ninja as well, where with the guards, if they see you just like on the very edge tip of their vision cone, they catch like a glimpse of you, but they don't see you. So then they start moving towards you, but then you have to react very quickly. Otherwise, you're going to be fully in their vision cone, and then they see you and try to murder you. Noise is has kind of a similar thing, where we wanted to make it like very, very clear and very apparent. So what we did is we visualized all like capital N noises, like stuff, like sound events in the world that AIs can hear and react to. So anytime there is a sound caused by anything, we have this visual, effect that shows how big that there's this noise occurring that AIs will react to. But we also visualize it before the player actually takes any actions. So if the player's aiming at one of these blindingly bright lights, for instance, we in the game, we add like this visual effect so they can see this ring of like, this is how far the noise is going to travel if that light is broken. Which means before even committing to performing an action, the player knows what the consequences of that action are going to be, which means they can play intentionally, which again is the important thing that we're trying to provide. And this also was just kind of like plays to the fact that our game was a side-scrolling 2D game, and we could kind of do this more abstract thing, and it didn't seem super weird because the game itself is kind of abstract anyway. I think it would be interesting maybe to see something like this in a 3D game, but I really have no idea how you do it. Would it be like a weird like dome or cylinder? I'm glad we didn't have to solve that problem. So we have a movie which may or may not work. I imagine probably most of you people have played this game, but in case you haven't. Yeah, so you can see that, he's aiming at the light, and it shows the radius of the noise, and then you can see the effects on the guard are like, hey, my ears are going to hear this. So then noise wraps over him, and then he sort of reacts to it. And there's a bit with the AI I'm going to talk about in a second as well, but then we do the aiming thing where you can see that he's like panning with that aiming reticle. So again, it shows this, if you make the noise over there, this guy won't hear it, but if you pan it over here, it will. Again, so it was all about, providing information ahead of time so people can plan and be intentional with how they're playing. Cool. Okay, so the second thing is, in Mark of the Ninja, we made a very conscious decision to make the AI and kind of what's going on in their heads very, very transparent. So there's this high-level notion of, basically all the AI can exist at, 3 levels of awareness, where they're just kind of normal, hanging out, nothing's really going on. They're suspicious, where they, heard a noise, or, like I was saying earlier, caught, just a faint, quick glimpse of the ninja. And then there's the full-on, they either saw the ninja, directly with their eyes, or saw a dead body, and at that point they become, agitated and aggressive, and they behave differently, and they never come back down from being in that state. The other thing we do to make the AI really transparent, and this was kind of to provide as many bridges in that cause and effect chain of causality as possible, is that whatever caused the AI to change state, we put a visual indication of that on the screen. And then we link those things with color coding and other effects. So we'll just get to the video and then I'll explain it. So with this, breaks the light, you see that yellow pulsing thing. It's this is where the noise came from, and that thing is the same color as the question mark icon above his head. The icon itself has that little cooldown timer thing. Oh, now he saw the ninja. When the ninja disappears, we put that white outline, so it's this is the last place he saw you, that's where he's going to be looking for you. So because, that's what was the thing that had his interest last. And then, just for consistency, we also do the same thing in reverse, where when the player loses sight of guards, we also do that outline thing. Close. Yes. Okay. So the third heresy we committed, the third major departure from kind of stealth game tropes in the past, was we tried to narrow the gulf of execution as much as possible. So what I mean by gulf of execution is, in the game, in any game, there are going to be things that the player wants to do, things that their character could reasonably do, but they just can't do them themselves because they're blocked just by their current level of fluency with the game's controls, right? And this isn't like a value judgment. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. Some games, Street Fighter, for example, are all about this idea, right? but it can potentially, it wasn't necessarily the best thing for our game. So in the context of Thief, so if you haven't played it, in Thief, the primary way the player has to kind of change the state of the world is through these like magical arrows. So there's like they each have like an elemental property. So there's like a water arrow that if you shoot it at a torch, the torch goes out. There's like a moss one where if you shoot it at like a loud, noisy metal grate, then all this moss grows out, and then you can walk across it and it'll be all sneaky and quiet. The thing about these arrows is that you have to pay for them with the resources you get in the game. Anytime you fire them, they're immediately used up. It's very hard to get more of them, so they're a very, very, very precious resource. But the aiming mechanisms for shooting them are also very difficult. If you so the only thing you have to actually aim is that little tiny weird rectangle like crosshair thing at the end of the bow, and because like these aren't hit scan weapons, they're all like modeled with physics, so then like if you want to shoot something far away, you actually have to like track the arrow up. So it provides like a very satisfying like feeling of mastery when you like early in the game you basically have to like walk right up to a torch and just shoot it point blank, but then as you become more skilled in the game, you can like nail this crazy shot from across a courtyard and you just feel like, you know, an absolute arrow lord. But that's just not what we wanted to do for Ninja. Partially, it just wasn't the right decision for our game. The big part of that was we found that like having something where there's like a high degree of a high gulf of execution is that it slows intentional play a lot, because if people feel like they can't rely upon being able to execute their plan, they're not going to make a plan, or they're only going to like rely on the one thing that they know they can pull off and they're not going to try anything else. The other thing is just like aiming in 2D is actually really goddamn hard, right? Like most 2D games, you know, you use any kind of projectile-based game, like you're going to be using your previous shots as tracers for your next shots. And that's fine. That's how most 2D shooting games work, and it works great. Except in a stealth game, when you miss one shot, oh, now the guy sees you, he turns around and blasts you in the face. Like, you basically have to be able to hit every single shot you want to hit. And the other thing is, like, fictionally, right, the player is supposed to be like this crazy, badass, super highly trained ninja, and then if you're constantly like bumbling around trying to shoot out a light, that's a little maybe doesn't jive with the aesthetic experience we were trying to provide. So what we did is we implemented this notion of focus aiming. So if you play the game, whenever you hold down the left trigger, or if you're playing on mouse and keyboard, the control button, basically the entire game state pauses. It just freezes time absolutely, and the only thing that still is active during this like focus mode is the aiming reticle, right? So initially this was just a thing I like cobbled in one Sunday. Like I just came to the office, was like, this is gonna be a good idea, and like just pooped it in there in like 2 hours. And so it worked, it seemed good, so we kind of said, okay, this is interesting, but this ability seems very powerful, so it's definitely, we're gonna have to have like some kind of resource bar on it at some point. But that obviously wasn't the most important thing we needed to deal with, so we just kind of like left it in this like infinite duration thing for a while. And then when we finally were like, okay, well, it's too powerful, we got to put a resource bar on it. And then when we did that, it like completely just goddamn sucked, right? Like we tried like 2 or 3 different means of doing it, and every time it's just like it made the ability less interesting. It made people not want to use it, which entirely undercut the point of the thing in general. As a tangent, I think like there's kind of like a high level balance lesson here in that like some game mechanic ability, whatever, is only broken if the encounters are built in such a way that that thing can break it, right? So because we had this focus, unlimited duration, like stop time thing for so long, we just kind of built the encounters to support it, and it was totally fine, right? So like I don't think there's any like objective notion of like ability, like power or balance or whatever. It's always contextual. Anyway, so what this did is that it really let the players do what they intended to do, what they wanted to do, right? So it's like, okay, well, rather than having to fuddle with aiming controls to be able to, you know, shoot out a light so I know I can like land in the darkness and sneak on by, they could just like aim at the thing, hit the button, and do it. And the most interesting thing is it actually let people do things that just simply like the human fingers cannot move fast enough to be able to do, right? So in the focus aiming mode, like you can actually switch between your different items. So you can like, you know, aim one dart at that light and then like aim a smoke bomb over there and like throw a toxic poison thing at that guard over there. You can basically, while your time is all frozen, you line up those 3 things, you release the button, and boom, 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 they all go off right away. And so, yes, hypothetically, maybe some amazing savant wizard could like push all those buttons fast enough, but almost nobody could. But by, you know, putting in this pause time freezing thing, it was completely feasible for anybody to be able to do, which I think is really cool. Third movie. This one's pretty simple, but it's basically, you know, hanging on. Oh, there's Matt too. Hang on, you know, aims at these 3 lights, releases the button, and aptly grapple hooks back up to the ceiling before they even touch the ground. So that's certainly something that, you know, if someone was super fluent with the controls, they might be able to get to that point maybe, but it's just going to be some like infinitesimal percentage of people. But with the way we implemented the focus aiming, anybody can do that, and that's awesome. Okay, so the 4th thing, let me see how I'm doing on time here. Yeah, we're going to be okay, actually. In Mark the Ninja, we had very limited consequences for failure. Basically, this just boils down to checkpoint frequency. So traditionally, stealth games, especially 2D games that are not stealth games because there aren't really many of those, especially games like these, basically increase their difficulty by putting a lot of your progress on the line, right? Where if you die, you're going to have to go back and repeat a lot of the game. In general, I'm pretty leery about like making your game difficult in this fashion, but it's especially problematic for stealth games because a lot of the way people play stealth games, you know, there's kind of some waiting and some sneaking and stuff, and they're not exactly the most fast-paced thing. It's not like a Super Meat Boy level where you can just bounce right back into it, right? So what happens, and if you like do any amount of playtesting, this becomes the most obvious thing in the world, is if people get like halfway through some encounter doing something and then die and have to go back to the beginning of some stretch of gameplay, they will do exactly the exact same thing they did before. Like they will, because it worked, right? Like of course they will. They're going to do the thing that got them like at least halfway there. The problem is this turns into tedium very, very, very quickly. And so... And it's actually like I think it's kind of bullshit anyway most of the time because you know if you have like some chunk of level, right, and like the player successfully completes 2 objectives, but then they or encounters, checkpoints, whatever, not checkpoints. If they successfully complete like 2 encounters and they die on the 3rd one because the game designer like arbitrarily dictated they have to go back to the first one and do those ones again, even though they already demonstrated their competency there, that thing seems very weird to me. Now again, like it's possible to have like a game be successful and awesome and do this, right? Like I think obviously Dark Souls is all about this and that's one of my favorite games of all time. But I think those games are kind of like the exceptions that prove the rule. Like unless your game is like as focused and tight and absolutely about that kind of experience, I would not encourage making your game difficult by putting a lot of player progress on the line. And so what we did in Ninja was this. So got Mr. Ninja Man creeping around, shoots a bird nest. Oh, people hear, oh no, there's a guy and a dog and dead. Then, oh look, you spawned so quickly. And then makes the same noise, goes the other way. Boom, hey, he sneaked and got pie, and now he's totally good. And that literally, that loop of trying something, failing, being able to try something else and succeeding, like some games have death animations that take longer than that entire movie clip, right? And that's kind of weird. So basically what we did in Ninja was you had checkpoints like roughly between each encounter. Like any significant chunk of challenge, after that there'd be a small checkpoint. And what actually came out of this is we had more freedom in terms of changing the difficulty and trying different things in those encounters, right? Because if like, you know, if you have like say 7 minutes of gameplay on the line every time you die, if you get to like minute 6:30 and then like some instant kill laser cuts you in half, like that's, you know, fucking table flipping moment, right? But if like you go back 12 seconds, people don't really care about that. So we had a lot more freedom to just do different things in those encounters, having instant kill things and stuff like that, and it was never really a problem. The other thing is that the players had much more freedom to experiment with how they wanted to approach the encounters. Because again, if people have like 7 minutes of progress on the line, they're generally going to be playing pretty conservatively and only doing the things they know that work. And then, you know, dominant strategies become a much bigger problem. But when people know that like if they try something and they fail, they're going to go back 2 seconds, well, then they're going to try more different things. And that's kind of what our game is about, right? It's about experimenting with all the game's various systems and then kind of figuring out how to manipulate them. And that becomes much more viable when you don't have like a giant chunk of progress on the line. There isn't like any sort of quick and dirty like, oh, put one every 1.7 minutes or whatever. It's just, but if you do, and we did a lot of playtesting on Ninja. This is the easiest thing in the world to discover during playtesting, right? Like if someone's playing and then they get killed and they go back, if they kind of like slump back and roll their eyes, it's like, oh, need to put another checkpoint in there. But if they stay like forward and engaged, then you're totally good. And above all other things, if you can, find a way to make it so that you have no load times between dying and being able to play again. Like, that is probably one of like the most pace murdering, like flow slaughtering things in the world. Like, obviously, if you're working on like an existing engine or whatever, you may not have the ability to do this, but if at all possible, like engineering wise, even if it means you can't do other stuff, this is the single thing that will garner you more goodwill than just about anything else. So for the love of God, please do it. Okay, finally, the kind of the last heresy of Ninja was we had much less open level design than most other stealth games do. This is obviously a thing that is characteristic of many stealth games, right? Like when you think of Thief or Dishonored or Hitman or whatever, you have like these big, wide, open spaces that are meant to be relatively representational, and then, you know, you can approach it kind of however you see fit, right? Like you can kind of like find a way to sneak up on the building and then go in through the balcony, or like find the other door down in through the basement, or like get a disguise and sneak past the servants or whatever. We tried to build levels that were kind of more open and interconnected like this in Ninja, and they're just goddamn terrible. And so then we kind of thought, it's like, well, what are you know, there's this other type of 2D game that does have this big, wide open, interconnected feel, right? Like the portmanteau Metroidvania. But the funny thing is, if you look at how the space in a Metroidvania is actually composited, it's like one big interconnected world, but the spaces themselves are all these small compartmentalized areas. And I think, obviously, initially this is almost certainly just a technical constraint where, you can only put so much level into memory on a bloody NES at once. I'm sure Brian knows all about that. We should actually talk about maybe why Metroid is the way it is. Anyway, but even though those technical constraints are obviously gone now, modern Metroidvanias still keep this very compartmentalized structure, right? Or at least most of them do. And I think that's because, like, mentally mapping 2D space is actually pretty hard, right? Like, what we found is that when the spaces tended to get too big, it just feels like it's very hard to do to kind of internalize that fundamentally abstract layout, because, obviously our brains are built for like visualizing and understanding a 3D space, right? So there's already this abstract space we're asking people to put into their heads, and when it gets too big, it's just people get very lost. And I haven't done like any science on this. I would like to go to the literature at some point, but this is just kind of based on our observations of both our games and other games. That basically, it seems like you have about a screen's worth plus like half to three-quarters of a screen in any particular direction. And when the spaces become meaningfully larger than that, it becomes pretty hard for a lot of people to kind of internalize that space and like feel competent in it. If the space is kind of pretty horizontal or pretty vertical, you can kind of get away with it having a bit more. And this is, not only is this how most Metroidvanias composite their space, but Ninja more or less conforms to this as well. We don't have the proverbial blue doors that segment all of our spaces, but basically in between about every chunk of space like this, we have some kind of aperture or pathway or whatever that only the player can move through, which kind of means like, all right, I've moved into this next area and I can forget about what came behind. But, of course, the levels should still feel very open, right? Because that is an important part of kind of the stealth experience. And of course, playing the player-centric design, of course, right? Like, we didn't want to have this very linear thing that just kind of prescribes that everyone is going to have to move through this space the exact same way. So what we ended up doing is kind of pushing that openness down a level, right? Where we get primarily the way that players are able to be sneaky in Ninja is they have movement abilities that greatly outstrip the enemies. Like, you can climb on the walls and the ceilings, you can grappling hook around and all that stuff. And basically, the player can move through space in a way that they can stay undetected, but they can move through that space in a bunch of different ways. And so that movement also is very important for that movement to be very precise and predictable again, right? So with, for example, the grappling hook, it's like, it's not like some kind of aiming thing or whatever. It's like if you're close enough to one, there's an icon on the screen and you push the right shoulder button or the right mouse button, you just go straight there and that's it. There's no like there's no skill component to that, because we didn't want to interrupt people's planning and create this like skill challenge when really it was supposed to be about, intent and execution. So that notion I talked about before of narrowing the gulf of execution, we also applied to the player's movement abilities. The other thing is that we use a lot of vents in our game, which is like a horrible game trope, but is also a thing that I love. Just because like having a level design element where it's kind of like a thing that people kind of accept as a fictional trope, but is a chunk of space that only the player can move through is really, really important. And also, I think Ninja has the lowest time to vent of any game ever. Like in the new Deus Ex, I think you can start the game, you can be in a vent in about 2 minutes. But in Ninja, it's like 5 seconds, and I'm pretty happy with that. Okay, so at a very high level to recap, the 5 kind of big departures we made from traditional stealth game design that was all still in service of providing that core fundamental stealth experience was we had, oh, that's terrible, well, whatever. We had very transparent stealth system. We had very transparent AI. We narrowed the gulf of execution as much as we possibly could to provide people like the ability to play with intentionality and deliberateness. We had very limited consequences for failure. And we had much less open level design, but we pushed kind of still the player-centricness of it just down a level. So there's a lot of choice and expressiveness in the way you move through the space, even though everyone's still ultimately going from point A to point B. And what these things all did was allow us to create a game that was all about intentional play and player-centric systems. So even though on the surface it didn't really look like a stealth game, it felt like one. And so even though, it doesn't really resemble these kind of games, it lives in the same like player space, and I think that's really important and a thing I'm actually really happy with. Of course, like I've just been banging on here, but certainly this is not in any way like a product of just the things I wanted or the stuff I wanted to do. Klei has a fantastic design team that contributed a ton to Ninja. Also some of the most talented artists I've ever worked with, and some amazing engineers as well. Our awesome audio guy, and a really great writer. If there's any of these people you kind of want to talk to more about what they did on Ninja or the problems they had to solve or whatever, please come talk to me and I can happily put you in touch. And that's it. So thank you all very much. And it's literally 10:45. So I guess there are enough time for